Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I am your host, Rob Port. Kelly Armstrong, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, joins me for a quick question and answer segment later in the show. His audio was not the best. I don't know if it was his cell phone connection or I was having some internet issues on my end. I use Skype. A little peek behind the curtains, if you will, on how you produce. I use Skype to call out to the people that I'm interviewing, and normally it works great, but this time around I feel like my internet was kind of a little flaky, and that led to not the best connection, but I think he's intelligible through most of it, so it's a good interview coming up. But before we get there, I want to talk for a moment about the Democrats and their debate this week. They had 47 Democratic candidates. I can't, was it 47 candidates? However many it is. Is it like 24? I don't even know how many are in the race. But there was a bunch of candidates who debated, and those candidates, it was interesting. It was interesting to listen to what they have to say, but the first debate, I guess puts me in mind in thinking that we're in the presidential campaign season in earnest. Now, these days it doesn't feel like the presidential election cycle ever really ends, right? I mean, there's 4 years between elections, but come on. The candidates for the next, people start buzzing about the candidates for the next, election cycle almost before the new president is inaugurated. So it never ends, and I wouldn't blame you if you felt like it never ends, and it's I would say it's boring to talk about, but clearly it's not. It's like a big national reality television show anymore, particularly now in the Trump era. I think President Trump, just stylistically, I think he's a TV guy. He's always been a TV guy, and he gets ratings, and obviously that worked for him. He won, and now other candidates, I think, are emulating him to one degree or another, and it has. It's become a national reality television show. And that's what I was thinking of as I was watching all these different candidates. And, you have to go elsewhere for an analysis on everything that they were saying, because I don't know that there were so many candidates on the stage, and they each had, just maybe a dozen minutes each in total to really talk about what they stand for. And I don't know that any single candidate is going to be able to give you anything more but a very cursory view of how they feel about the issues or what their philosophies are or anything else like that. I mean, for the most part, you're just going to get some talking points. So I don't know. I was watching it, and I don't really feel like that's even worth all that much analysis, but it is what it is, and people are talking about it endlessly. But here's what I was thinking, because I think we're starting to see some new approaches to politics, but also we're very much seeing the old tried and true. Now, for a new approach, I was reading, there was a Washington Post story recently, and they were talking about how candidates are on the hunt to create viral moments for themselves. And sometimes these happen organically, like maybe it's an interaction, when the politician's out kissing babies and pressing the flesh. Somebody says something and it creates a viral moment for the candidate. Or sometimes these are very carefully choreographed, where the candidate will just jump into something and the whole thing's just very planned out. For an example of that latter being Senator Elizabeth Warren, presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, responding to a woman on Twitter who was asking if Elizabeth Warren could help her with dating advice. And so Senator Warren, said, "Hey, direct message me. We'll talk this out." Obviously sending that message publicly because, she wanted to create buzz. Oh, look, a presidential candidate is helping some woman out with her relationship problems. And, oh boy, doesn't that just show how much Elizabeth Warren cares, right? Because it's all about these candidates who are vying for an office that represents hundreds of millions of people across the country, and they're trying to do it by making personal connections. I don't care just about everybody, but I care about you specifically. And I mean, they're doing it, and I'm obviously being critical of it, and I don't necessarily blame the politicians for doing it, because clearly it's something that American voters want. And it's a stupid thing to want, too. I mean, why do you want this person who more than likely you are never going to meet in your entire life? Why do you want to feel like you can have a beer with them? Why do you want to feel like they care about your love life? But they do. They want to create these personal connections. That's why Beto O'Rourke is like live streaming his dental appointments, right? Like you're his best buddy and you're right there with him while he's getting his cavities filled. I once attended a conference. This was years and years ago. And really sort of at the dawn of the social media age. At the same conference, we learned what hashtags were for Twitter. So this should, maybe place it appropriately in the timeline for you. But at this conference, one of the speakers said that the politicians of the future, if they really wanted to get the attention of voters, would have to reduce their messaging down to the point where it could fit on a cat meme. Now, I laughed at the time. I thought, that's funny. It's a funny joke. It's a funny thing to think of, but that's too cynical, I thought. Well, naive me, because I think that's essentially where we're at. I mean, when we have all of these Democratic presidential candidates on a stage and they're each getting, like 10 minutes each, 11 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever it worked out to be, really in total speaking time throughout the evening. I mean, they're being asked to describe their policy platform decisions in like 2 minutes. What are those but memes, right? I mean, it's not quite the same thing as putting it on a cat picture, but we're not far off from it. It's a little ridiculous, but yet that seems to be what we want. I mean, we're distilling all of this stuff down, not into like philosophical arguments or detailed policy arguments, but it's all about how the candidate makes you feel. Maya Angelou, and I'm gonna butcher this because I don't remember the quote directly, and I'm gonna paraphrase it here. And I'm recording this, and I don't want to take the time out to go Google it. But she essentially said something that people will forget the things that you say, and they'll forget the things that you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I think the politicians have all taken that to heart these days, right? So it doesn't really matter what they say, and it doesn't really matter what policies or positions that they take. It's just how they make everybody feel. And again, it's hard to blame the politicians for that because it works. We vote for it. We respond to it. But for as much as that's changed, for as much as politicians today, I mean, could you imagine Bob Dole once upon a time, like inviting reporters in to like watch his, like Facebook live streaming, and that didn't exist in his era. But could you imagine him like bringing reporters in while he's getting cavities filled? Can you imagine? People would think that this guy had an enormous ego for thinking people would even care about that sort of thing. Can you imagine Bob Dole saying, "Oh yeah, let me give you relationship advice"? Come on. But the more things change, the more they stay the same. One staple of politics, and not just American politics, but I imagine politics throughout history, politics wherever you get in the world, is promising voters things that will be paid for by other people. Case in point, Bernie Sanders has done this recently. He is proposing a tax on stock market and bond transactions to pay off everybody's student loan debt, and going forward to pay the tuition for people to go to whatever college that they want to go to. I imagine there's going to have to be, I say any college they want to go to. At some point, you think that there's going to have to be some limits, right? I mean, you can't just go to any institution. Otherwise, we're going to have zany institutions popping up all over the place that exist not so much to educate students, but to harvest the government money attached to them when they enroll. So you have that situation, but essentially, yeah, that's what he's promising. He's saying, well, we're going to tax Wall Street and we're going to pay off everybody's student loans. So everybody gets, that's not a small, student loans are over $1 trillion. I think it's like $1.6 trillion nationally. Even here in little North Dakota, my neck of the woods, North Dakota citizens, according to Business Insider, reported back in April, are carrying something like $2.4 billion in student loan debt. The average student loan debt for North Dakotans who have student loan debt is about $27,000. So you're not thinking that a lot of those people who are struggling to pay off that debt, to put that debt behind them. They're not listening to Bernie Sanders say, hey, I'll tax these other people. I'll make these other people, these evil Wall Street, right? These no good nicks on Wall Street, I'll make them pay off your student loan debt. Boy, doesn't that sound appealing. Now, of course, the reality is something Bernie Sanders can't actually deliver on. It's not just going to be Wall Street paying for that. Anybody who invests in Wall Street is going to be paying for it. And that means pretty much everybody, given the ubiquity of investing these days. If you have a 401k, if you have an IRA, if you have some money in a mutual fund, if you're a day trader playing around with stocks online, you are going to be paying this tax. It is a multi-trillion dollar tax on everybody. You think that's going to be good for our economy? And by the way, where do you think all these stock transactions and everything are going to start taking place if we're going to put such a huge tax on them? You know, the people trading these stocks, this trading might start happening somewhere else in some other market. We might see, I mean, there's been other countries that have literally implemented this. Sweden implemented this at one point, and that's exactly what they saw. They saw a decline in revenues from the tax because, guess what? The market adjusted. It went elsewhere, or they found other ways to do the transactions, and it just didn't pay as much as they were expecting it to pay. And so what Bernie Sanders is promising is he's promising a huge gift to the American people, paid for by other people. And it's ridiculous. It's not going to work. It's not something he can actually deliver on. But you know what? That doesn't really matter. What matters is winning. And by the way, you think, oh, sure, Port, you're just a partisan conservative commentator and you're harping on, you know, a socialist Democrat just because you don't like him. Well, you know what? Republicans do this too. Republicans campaign on tax cuts all the time. And rarely do these Republicans couple those tax cuts policies with the sort of spending reforms that will protect us from the resulting budget deficits when we reduce the amount of tax revenue coming in without doing anything to the budget to equalize that out. Now, I know sometimes it's fashionable to say, well, tax cuts pay for themselves. And sometimes they do. At certain rates and in certain economic conditions, yes, tax cuts can pay for themselves by stimulating more economic activity that then drives in more tax revenues than you had before. That can happen, but it doesn't always happen. And what Republicans are constantly doing is shrinking the tax base and shrinking tax rates. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that part of it. But if you're doing that and you're not making the spending adjustments along for it, all you're doing is promising the American people tax relief paid for by other people. Only in this instance, the other people are our children and our grandchildren who will be obligated to pay off the national debt once we're gone. Republicans do it. Democrats do it. The unifying theme is that we fall for it. Every time they go out and they're trotting out and they're giving us things they can't really deliver on. They're making these wild promises that they aren't really going to follow through on. Or they're pretending to be our friends. They're pretending to be somebody to give us relationship advice. They're inviting us into their kitchens to watch them cook. They're our best pals. It's all ephemera. It's nothing. What really matters is how they're going to govern. What really matters are their policies. But that stuff's dry. That stuff's boring. We voters don't really care about that. We care about all that other stuff. And so who's really to blame for this? Is it the politicians or is it us who fall for it every time they do it? My interview with Congressman Kelly Armstrong coming up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Joining me now is Congressman Kelly Armstrong, who is fresh off a congressional baseball game played on the home field of the Washington Nationals. How was that? I know you're a huge baseball fan, Kelly. How was that?
Played we'll use the term played loosely. I did what I did my favorite thing in the entire world. Sat on a bucket of balls in the dugout, watched the baseball game, and maybe gave a few pointers to people here and there. But I'm telling you, I don't care how old you are or wherever you are in life. If you're a baseball fan and you get to take batting practice on a major league field, you become 12 years old all over again.
Well, there's nothing like it. I've been to a few major league stadiums, and it's every time when you walk up the concourse and you kind of like it opens up and you see that field in front of you, man, there's just nothing like that in the world. And we're taking America's game. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, I always go to the old Bull Durham line where they use white balls for batting practice.
Yeah. We're taking America's game to London this weekend. The New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox playing in London in a field that almost seems to have like Little League dimensions to it, by the way. So that ought to be something to watch.
Well, if anybody who doesn't play the game ever all the time can understand it, it's anybody who understands cricket. So.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, we call it America's game. I was reading a book where they actually found references, and not just calling it like rounders or whatever, but calling it baseball, dating back to like the 15th, 16th century in England, like nobility playing it. So we call it America's pastime, but it very much has its roots in England anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something more serious, though. Immigration debate. There's a lot of hot. We're doing this interview on Thursday. This'll air on Friday. But just before you came on, some drama on the floor of the House over an immigration bill, and I saw a video on Twitter of a speech that you gave. Basically, calling on Democrats to bring forward the Senate version of an immigration bill that passed yesterday, funding for the crisis that's going on at the border. Talked to Senator Kramer about that yesterday. You're saying, House, bring that bill to a vote here. You're saying there's some drama on the floor. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, this bill passed the Senate with 84 votes. I mean, Senator Chuck Schumer voted for it. Senator Dianne Feinstein voted for it. Senator Durbin voted for it. This is what bipartisanship looks like. So we're just asking them to allow this vote on the floor. And we were doing a unanimous consent motion, which Democratic leadership was objecting to. And now we have just got word that they pulled the rule, which means they don't have enough support in their conference to keep us from winning the vote, which means hopefully sometime in the very near future, like in minutes or hours, we will be voting on the Senate version so we can get those resources down to the border and get some of these conditions taken care of.
Well, I mean, that's understanding what those conditions are too. This is such a white hot issue in terms of partisanship. And there's been a lot of stuff out there about how children, don't have, they don't have proper clothing. They're not getting bathed appropriately. They're not being fed appropriately. Do you have any insight into what's actually going on down there? Because when I read a lot of these reports, they're based on, court filings from immigration advocates. Those obviously aren't always the most objective of sources. I've been looking for, more sort of, firsthand reports, maybe from like journalists or whatever. And there's just, I know the journalist got a tour recently of the facility in Clint. But, what they're reporting, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say that these kids that everything's fine. I don't know. But I'm just wondering if Congress has any real insight, any boots on the ground, just in terms of what's actually going on in these facilities.
Yeah, and we get briefed too. And I mean, and to be clear, everything's not fine. It's not. But I think you have to take this back a little bit. And what I mean by that is, this White House has been saying this is coming for a long time. For 2 months, we've been saying that there's a crisis on the border. I mean, the obvious uptick in illegal crossings and asylum seekers is going up. I mean, last month the numbers were huge. But the other issue is the type of people that are coming, which are family units, young children, all of that. So we get into these, and there's a reason asylum is supposed to happen at border stations and not just generally across, because we don't have the facilities, we don't have the resources, they've run out of money, and we need to get those resources down there. We also need asylum reform, but that is going to be a longer conversation. And right now, we just need to get this funding there so we can start providing the resources so we can take care of some of these things.
I'm reading some quotes from earlier this year from Democratic leaders basically saying that there is no crisis at the border. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the situation was a, quote, fake crisis at the border. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called it a, quote, crisis that does not exist. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer said there is no crisis at the border. House Democratic Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries said there is no crisis at the border. They're calling it a fake crisis. They're saying there is no crisis. But now clearly there is a crisis. Why the about face all of a sudden?
Well, because I think no matter what your messaging is, and no matter what rhetoric you want to portray, at some point in time, the facts become so overwhelming you can no longer maintain that course. And I mean, I think the common denominator with all of those people is they hadn't been there. And while I hadn't been there, I had spoke with our border agents at the northern border at Pembina when I was back in North Dakota, and a lot of them had been there. And we have had a lot of our members go down to the border and actually see what's going on. So, I mean, you can have whatever messaging you want against this White House. You can dislike President Trump so bad that you're not going to support anything he's asking for. But at some point in time, when reality sets in, you have to shift gears. And I am glad that the Senate has done it, and now that it appears that Democratic leadership is going to allow their members to vote on this.
A lot of the narrative that's out there with what's going on at the border seems to be, look, this is another example of how President Trump is callous, or the Trump administration, or Republicans generally, are callous to the plight of asylum seekers, callous to the plight of immigrants coming in, trying to make their way, illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call them, trying to make their way into the country. And to me, I'm looking at it, it's more, what more can we expect from our border personnel? I mean, they're doing the best that they can with what they have. The problem is we keep getting these surges, these waves of people trying to get into the country. Our policy, we are not unified at all in how our policy has been enforced, even from presidential administration to presidential administration. There are wild swings in what the policy is. Congress can't seem to speak with any sort of a unified voice on what we want the policy to be. It is absolute chaos. But meanwhile, there are practical realities, such as there are people coming to our border. They're being arrested. They're being detained for one reason or another. And somebody's got to take care of them. We need facilities. We need food. We need clothing. We need furniture. Those are just practical realities, whatever your position is on this issue. And it seems like all of that just gets ignored because we're having this never-ending political pie fight over what we do about the situation.
Absolutely. And I mean, the answer is without borders. I mean, I've said this before. Listen, if there's every single kid that shows up, give a big hug, wrap in my arms, and protect them from the whole world. I understand the humanity of this, but at the same time, we had two Democratic candidates in a debate last night call for decriminalizing illegal immigration.
Right.
I mean, we have to have a serious conversation about asylum seeking and about our immigration policy and all of it, because we can't take 25 million more people into the United States. I mean, the answer cannot be everybody can come under every circumstance.
Well, right. I mean, because essentially what they're saying was, let's just decriminalize it. So they're saying, okay, we'll just come across the border. So that means there's no control for communicable disease, right? I mean, some of these children have chicken pox, they have measles, they have mumps. I mean, there are just practical realities there for what that means for them coming into our country. By the way, speaking of the debate last night, what did you think? I asked Senator Kramer this yesterday, which of the Democratic candidates he thought presented the most likely challenge to Donald Trump. Are you seeing anybody there? I mean, who do you think could really get some traction in the upcoming election?
Well, I think just from a purely objective political standpoint, I think Elizabeth Warren probably made the most ground last night. Now, keep in mind, I was playing in a baseball game, so I am more with I thought O'Rourke. I think Beto O'Rourke's campaign is done. I think Julian Castro probably got noticed more than he had before, but I'm not sure he had been noticed at all before. So, I think it's a snapshot in time, and we went through this, right? I thought our primary process 2 years ago was fantastic. As the chair, I got the opportunity to go some of this debate. In fairness, I think the way the Democrats are doing it is probably a little better than the way we did it, and that they're doing it on 2 nights instead of having a B team and an A team. But I mean, it's a snapshot in time. At this point in time, 2 years ago, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and I don't know who was third, but Scott Walker. We're 1, 2, and 3 in the polls, and between all 3 of them, I think they won 2 primary states. So we got a long way to go, and it's early. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm going to popcorn.
I want to get to a couple of the questions from listeners. First one comes from Larry, and he's referring to the fact that Robert Mueller has said he's going to testify before Congress. Larry asked via Twitter, if Mueller testifies, will Republicans challenge him with any questions of substance, or will it be a series of self-absorbed, bloviating displays for TV?
Well, I'm hoping there'll be questions of substance. Ranking Member Doug Collins, I think, was the first member of the House to call for a I said that before all of these hearings, whether it's Barr or what I would call the clown show hearings that we have had in judiciary. I've said the guy that should come in here is Robert Mueller. So we'll see where it is. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, he stands by a report. It'll be interesting to see how he answers questions. Also, just purely mechanically, it's going to be very interesting to see how they do it. But yourself, this is Congress, and it's not and this is a bipartisan thing. There will be too much bloviating.
Via Facebook, Roland has a question. He says, I quote, a few years ago, this is kind of a long one and he's got a lot of different questions, so we may have to work through this one a little bit. But he says, I quote, a few years ago, North Dakota rejected Measure 1 by 63%, which called for recognizing human life from conception. Recently, Trump has stated he supported abortion in cases of rape, incest, or severe medical conditions. You have supported the Republican pro-life line since elected. So where do you really stand? Do you represent the 63% of the voters who voted against Measure 1? Do you support the limited right to abortion per Trump? How about heartbeat bills? Should Roe be overturned? And if abortions were made illegal, how do you punish them? In some pro-life countries such as El Salvador, a woman could get 25 years of prison for an abortion and even 5 years for a suspected miscarriage. She has to prove the miscarriage was not her fault. If you are opposed to abortion, what should the punishment be for the woman having an abortion? If a woman's life is at risk, should she be required to die in order to prevent an abortion? A lot of questions there, but I think basically he's looking for just an overall, where are you at on the abortion question?
I have a heartbeat in North Dakota. My mother was a Catholic kindergarten teacher. I am pro-life. I grew up pro-life. This was way before I got elected to Congress, paid for Congress. I will point out that overturned, abortion does not become illegal. It becomes a states' rights issue. So that's one thing I think often gets left out in this argument. And I think if the woman's life is at risk, you protect the mother, you deal with those issues. But oftentimes these are straw man arguments. The answer, these are issues that happen, and they happen in a very, very small minority of people. Listen, I have an 11-year-old daughter. I thought of these issues from. But I think the first point is whether or not you believe Roe is the right decision, whether it overturned the 14th Amendment privacy and unfairly infringed states' rights. And I think it did. And I think the future actions we is good public policy. It's a good Christian way to view the world, and we need to keep working through this.
Do you feel like there's – I feel – a part of me thinks like – I think of like alcohol prohibition, right? And we made it illegal because we didn't want people to drink, and then people just kind of did it anyway. And I worry, I am pro-life too, and I would rather not have abortions. I wish nobody had to get an abortion, which, phrasing it that way, what do you think of more push towards making it, and I realize making it like Congress can just pass a law and make this so. It's going to require research in the scientific community and everything else. But I really think that what we need to pursue is creating a situation where nobody gets pregnant unless they want to get pregnant. I mean, to me, that seems the best way to reduce abortions, just reduce unwanted pregnancies. Do you see value in that approach?
Absolutely. I think science is getting better. More and more people are doing those things, and working forward to that. But I will say this, one of the only movements that is getting younger and more educated is the pro-life movement. And I think a real big reason for that is people understand it. And I think another big reason for it is because we can't even have we can't even have a real discussion like on the floor of the Congress about the Born Alive Protection Act or about banning late-term abortions. Now, late-term abortions are issues that these are not extreme views. Almost every country in Europe already bans late-term abortions, except in very, very unique and specific circumstances, like the actual life of the mother. Yet that's something we can't even pass through U.S. Congress. And I think when you get to that point, that's where you get pushback from a lot of people.
Do you support making the pill, quote unquote, the pill, making it an over-the-counter drug?
I don't know enough about the actual medical issues involved in that, but if there aren't any and like serious, like people could have serious side effects, I think it is a part of what we'll go to growing up right now. And I think if we want to have less abortions, that's a good way to start.
Kelly, thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
That's it for today's Plain Talk Podcast. Remember, new episodes of the show come out most weekday mornings. If you're listening to this on a platform that allows you to rate or review the podcast, I would appreciate it if you leave an honest rating, an honest review. Every new rating, every new review helps those algorithms out and helps other people find the podcast. So that's a good thing. If you're following me on social media, well, if you're not following me on social media, you should be. I'm Rob Porter, Say Anything Blog on Facebook or Twitter. Just search, you'll find them and follow. And if you follow, say hi, because I like it when people say hi. Also, my email address, use it. If you're confused about something on the show, if you're having trouble, you just want to give some feedback, you just want to say hi, email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. It's the best way to get in touch with me. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.